Hi, and welcome back to this Thursday edition of Focal Point on AFR Talk, 888-589-8840 if you'd like to join the program. Let's get to the soundbite roster. You know, we've got this debacle of a budget bill that has been signed off on by Paul Ryan. Now, this is weirding a lot of people out who just don't understand why Ryan is doing this, and I want to explain just very briefly, just as succinctly as I can, what the problem is with the Ryan budget. I'm looking at a piece here from the Heritage Foundation. They do great work. They're flatly opposed to this thing. And here are the three problems that they identify with the Ryan budget deal. Number one, it blasts through spending caps. In other words, it increases dramatically federal spending. Now, there was a bipartisan spending agreement that was forged in 2011. It was part of the Budget Control Act. Budget Control Act. That means it's a law. And it set spending caps to restrain, for the first time, to begin to exercise some kind of restraint on federal spending. This blows that completely out of the tub. It just blasts right through those spending caps. This is Paul Ryan doing this. So he's proposing a bill. He's all gaga over it. And the mainstream media, Politico, thinks this is great. USA Today has got a piece today singing his praises. They just love this thing. They think Paul Ryan is the greatest thing since mayonnaise. So they're all hot to trot. Paul Ryan is defending it. And yet it increases federal spending. It blows completely through the spending caps. It would increase spending by $65 billion in the next 2 years. And the savings that are in this thing don't kick in until the end of the decade. In fact, most of the savings that this bill projects don't happen until the 11th and 12th year. So it's even beyond the window of 10 years. And that's just complete myth to think you can make a decision today that's on spending that's going to have any effect 10 or 11 or 12 years from now is just completely blowing smoke. So it busts through the spending caps. It taxes and spends, and it spends now and delays savings till later. Budget deal would spend $63 billion over the next 2 years, but take 10 years to make up for this splurge. Again, the classic case of, I will gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. Now, you wonder, well, why did Paul Ryan do it? Well, I think it's because he wants to be president. And I think Paul Ryan is calculating. He got this glowing piece in USA Today for Paul Ryan budget deal may be career turning point. So he's got Politico. I mean, Politico is now thinking of Paul Ryan as the new Dr. Dreamy. USA Today, same thing. This guy's Dr. Dreamy. And so they are just glowing with praise for Paul Ryan. Why? Because he's sold out. He sold out conservative principle. And so the mainstream media love him. And that's how you know that this is a big problem, is all of the right people hate this bill and all of the wrong people love it. That's how you know that the Ryan budget deal is a bad one. Here's a piece by Mike Flynn at Breitbart. The Ryan Murray budget raises the national debt above the current law. In other words, his point is this actually breaks the law. The Budget Control Act is a law. It's still in force. Hasn't been repealed, hasn't been amended, hasn't been revoked. This just shatters the spending ceiling that is a matter of law, and it will increase our national debt over the next 9 years. Every year for the next 9 years, Paul Ryan's budget will increase our national debt. So there's no spending restraint and all that kind of stuff. So there's no wonder that people are against this thing. Well, let's grab a couple of sound bites here. Let's start with sound bite number 6. This is Paul Ryan, again, trying to justify what he's done here. Let's listen.
Sean, let me just make the last point, which is permanent law changes, permanent spending cuts. They take time to develop, but they're not, if they're going to be undone, Congress has to pass a new law to undo them. To your point, you're right on the money. This is not an agreement to balance the budget. That's what our budget does. Guess what, Sean? Elections have consequences. We're going to have to win a couple of elections to actually pass the kind of budgets that you and I are in favor of. The one I passed in the House just last spring. The House Republicans have passed 3 budgets in a row that actually balance the budget. Look, I'm not going to pretend that this budget solves our fiscal problems, because it doesn't. The budget that we pass in the House in the spring does solve our fiscal problems. But in this divided government, all right, you're not going to get that.
Now, Paul Ryan, a couple of major problems with what he said here. He is right when he said that elections have consequences. But he's using that as an excuse for throwing in the towel. And I say, Representative Ryan, you're exactly right. Elections have consequences. That's why the Republicans are in charge of the House of Representatives. Paul Ryan, elections have consequences. That's why Republicans are in charge of the House. And remember, every spending bill has to start in the House. So he's talking here about, we can't do anything until we win a couple of elections. That's balderdash. It's hogwash. It's hooey. Because of, for instance, if you want a balanced budget, I've said this before, I'm going to say it again because it's absolutely true. It's just a lack of spine on the part of Republicans. If you want a balanced budget, all the House has to do is refuse to raise the debt ceiling. That's it. Next time we come up against the debt ceiling, House just simply refuses to raise it, which requires the government then to live within its means. You'll have a balanced budget by the close of business that day, and the House of Representatives can do that all by itself. Doesn't need any cooperation from the Senate, doesn't need anybody in the Oval Office to sign off on it. If they simply refuse to authorize it because every revenue bill's got to start in the House, it's not going to happen. It cannot happen. So this is, Paul Ryan's just wrong about that. You don't have to win a couple elections to get a balanced budget. All you got to do is have the guts and the spine to refuse to raise the debt ceiling. And elections have consequences. That's exactly right. That's why the Republicans are in a position to get a balanced budget, because elections have consequences. All right. Rand Paul, one of the many senators that have come out against this thing, this is clip number 7, talking to Neil Cavuto. Here's what he had to say. Now, Neil Cavuto is talking about the fact that the Republicans, like Paul Ryan, are saying, look, no matter what happens here, we're going to get the blame. We don't want a government shutdown because they're going to blame us. So let's just go ahead and get past this thing. We don't want to get blamed for shutdown. We want to keep the focus on Obamacare. So let's just roll over on this issue. Here's what Rand Paul had to say.
But it's sort of a separate question, because I'm not talking about shutting down the government, nor was I in favor of it. But I would say that when we had the shutdown, the Democrats wanted to do a continuing resolution. This budget deal is worse than a continuing resolution because it actually increases spending by $60 billion in the first 2 years. And we know the history of Congress is they lie. They don't word. So after 2 years, no budget deal is worth the paper it's written on. It's only worth something in the first year or two. And mark my words, they'll go back on this deal also after a year or two, and they don't like it.
Well,
so
I think it's an example, though,
cuts.
Senator. I'm sorry, sir, but I think it's an example of the type of deal. And maybe I'm wrong. I don't want to put deals in his mouth or head that a Chris Christie would come up with, where they get a deal done. It might not be perfect to either side, but it keeps moving the ball forward. What do you think of that?
But here's the problem. It doesn't. It moves us backwards. It's worse than the status quo. The status quo will spend $60 billion less than the budget deal over the next 2 years. They do some ledger domain and they do some shell games, and they want to say there's less addition to the deficit. But over 10 years, this deal will add $7 trillion to the deficit. It does not significantly alter our course. We're still on a course for disaster.
This Paul Ryan is authoring this, and again, I said I think it has to do with his political ambition. He thinks that this is his ticket to the White House, and it's a drastic miscalculation on his part, because every conservative group in the country has come out against this thing. All of the right people are against this thing. All of the wrong people are for it. But he made the same miscalculation here that Marco Rubio did with immigration. Marco Rubio thought by getting out in front of amnesty, making amnesty happen, that was going to be his ticket to the White House. And he ran into the conservative base, said, no, we're not interested in amnesty. We're interested in a secure border. We're interested in cultural preservation. We are interested in the rule of law. So he's blown his chance, I think, frankly, to ever be president because he miscalculated. Paul Ryan's done the same thing. He thinks this is his ticket to the White House. By showing leadership, by showing his ability to reach across the aisle, to hammer out a deal, to make it happen in a bipartisan deal, working with one of the most liberal senators, so somehow this is going to be his ticket to the White House. Again, I don't see it that way. I think it's a ticket to the end of any political ambitions that he might have. You know, he makes a good point here, Rand Paul does. Look, this is worse than what the Democrats had in mind, because the Democrats were talking about a continuing resolution A continuing resolution keeps spending where it's at. That's why it's called a continuing resolution. You just keep spending money at the same pace that you're spending it now. This is worse than that because it increases spending by over $60 billion for the next 2 years. Over 10 years, it's going to increase the deficit by $7 trillion. So it doesn't move anything forward. It moves everything backward. Now, here's David Stockman. He was budget director under Ronald Reagan, clip number 8. Pretty shrewd guy. And he's on the Santelli exchange with Rick Santelli. Santelli says, look, House Republicans capitulated on this deal. He's properly referring to it as a surrender. And it's going to leave the country with an unsustainable fiscal situation, Santelli says, until the peak of the presidential primaries in 2015 when nothing will get done. So here's what David Stockman says to Rick Santelli about what the Republicans are doing.
Well, first, let's be clear. It's a joke and a betrayal. It's the final surrender of the House Republican leadership to beltway politics and to kicking the can and ignoring this budget monster that's hurtling down the road.
So just kicking the can down the alley. Now, let's wedge clip number 9 in here. This is Chris Matthews. And again, remember, my point throughout this whole segment is the reason you know that the Ryan budget deal is a bad idea is all of the right people are against it and all of the wrong people are for it. I give you Chris Matthews.
Howard, I've been waiting for that banner for, many years now, and I know we're all seen it now. That's the banner we've been rooting for, someone to be a leader.
Yeah, well, Chris, I think far from ending the civil war within the Republican Party, I think the events of the last 24 hours are just made it all-out war now.
And I think Howard Fineman is exactly right. It is all-out war in the Republican Party, and ladies and gentlemen, this is a good thing because we've got to smoke out. I mean, we're smoking out Paul Ryan now. I mean, this blows me away, frankly, that Paul Ryan would do this. I think his political ambition has messed up his gyroscope. When he accepted the vice presidential nomination, he started getting stars in his eyes about the Oval Office. It's completely skewed his judgment. And he's even not telling the truth about the capacity of the House to control spending. So I think there's now a war between the Tea Party, conservatives, Heritage Action, and these moderate Republicans that want to increase spending and raise our taxes. So this is a good thing. We need to flush out the Republicans in name only. Focal Point, AFR Talk.